Gosh, I have been on quite a journey with letting go of control, being willing to invest in a VA, knowing how to even go about it. In fact, I've probably experienced every challenge you could have. So, 4 years on from hiring my first VA, who worked with me for quite a number of years until she went to pursue her dream career, and having worked with my current VA now for a good few months, I have learned a lot. A few people in the Tutors Mastermind have asked my advice. So while sharing my lessons learned with them, I thought I'd share it with you as well. So have a listen. And if we're connected on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram, let me know what you'd add to my list of tips. And if we're not connected, let's change that now. Just come and find me and say hi. Welcome to the Upgrade Your Education Business podcast. I'm your host, Samantha, and I'm so pleased you're here. As an education business owner myself and a former teacher, I understand the nuances that only apply to us. So in this podcast, I share fluff-free, tailored and actionable ideas that you can mould to suit your needs. If you'd like to take this conversation further, please do reach out. I would love to meet you. And finally, it would mean the world to me if you could leave a review. That way, you'll be helping me help more people. Thank you for tuning in. Enjoy. Outsourcing for the first time is hard. You know you need it, but you don't know what to delegate, how to show someone how to do something that has thus far needed you, how to even decide on how many hours a month you should be budgeting for. But in my experience, the only way to learn is to do it. And I was lucky enough to find someone who wasn't very expensive and she was ridiculously patient and helpful. In fact, we worked with each other for a number of years. And most importantly, she was exactly who I needed at a time where I was just finding my feet with it all. So, regardless of where you are in this journey of outsourcing and delegating, I think you'll walk away with at least one light bulb moment. So, in no particular order, my first tip is to get into the right headspace. If you're not thinking about delegating in the right kind of way, if you aren't prepared to have a transition period, you risk being too controlling or backing out of the idea completely. So, if you like a systematic approach like I do, I'll share what I did to organize my mind and get into the right headspace. I started by listing all the tasks that happen and ones I wanted to happen in my business. And when I did this, I broke each task down. So take this podcast. I didn't just have a task called podcast. I broke it down into generating ideas, scripting, recording, editing, uploading, writing social media content, and writing email content. Then I tagged each task with either my name if it needed me. So the ideas, the scripting, the recording, that needs me, or at least I've decided not to delegate them. But the rest don't. They are things I can delegate. So I tagged them with to delegate. Now, when I say I tagged, I use ClickUp for this, which is a task management system. So I can add a label to tasks to categorize them. That's what I mean by a tag. But you can use a spreadsheet, pen and paper, whatever you find easier. The advantage of using something digital is that you can easily move things around and change things like tags or categories. Anyway, what this gave me was a really clear picture of what I needed to do and what I needed to delegate. I wasn't committing to delegating everything that I had tagged accordingly, but it gave me a great idea of the possibilities and it helped me make decisions. So after I did this, I just started with one area. So when I hired my very first VA, the task I started her on was social media content for my tuition Facebook page. Now, I knew she wasn't an English specialist and she didn't come from an education background. Stay until the end, by the way, for more on choosing VAs with the skill sets you need. So, since my VA didn't come from that background, I knew I needed something in place to guide her, and that led me to creating manuals and systems. So, I created a schedule for the kind of content to be posted on each day. I created an organized set of ideas for each day and different types of content. I created Canva templates, and I asked her to use wording from past content as a guide. I also put together a simple system that meant I reviewed the content before they were scheduled to be published. So from start to finish, I had documented and organized a process that allowed us to work smoothly together, and it's something I have for every task I delegate. I may not need so many steps, but I always have a step-by-step manual. As I've talked about in the past, the useful thing about this is that it forces you to look at tasks from someone else's perspective. And in the process, you simplify it, you streamline it, and you make it really clear. And this goes a really long way to eradicating that common block of, but this task needs me, or how can someone do this the way I do it? And this also feeds into mindset. You can't just delegate something and forget about it, especially not at the start of your working relationship with your VA, because you need to give them some time to settle into the task. At the start, they might have more questions, or they might need your feedback, or even make mistakes. Things might take a bit longer. Don't use that as a sign that you have picked the wrong person. It's completely normal for someone to need extra support when they start something new. If you chose the right VA, then this will and should happen because they want to do a great job, and soon enough, they'll be able to take over the task without so much input from you. Another tip I'll share relates to the challenge of deciding what to actually delegate. I talked earlier about my podcast example. I choose to do the generation of ideas, I choose to do the scripting, and I choose to record. And then I delegate the uploading and publishing sides to my VA. But in this process, I also create the Canva images and I write the show notes and I write the social media content and email content. My VA simply copies and pastes those. But if I needed to release more time, then I would change this. So, a great way of finding your ideal scenario is to imagine that you are an employee in your company and you're getting paid hourly. What tasks would you ask you to do? Which task makes the best use of your skill set? When I think of it this way, I could actually delegate the generation of ideas. I could delegate editing each episode. I could delegate writing content so that all I'm actually doing is scripting and recording the episodes. That would release a lot of time for me to spend on other tasks that absolutely need me. So, when you use this concept coupled with having a list of all the tasks in your business, you can actually delegate strategically. I now have an additional category of those tags I was talking about, and it's called to delegate. These are things that I might be doing for now, but I plan on delegating in the future. Now, when you work with a VA, you'll pretty much be working quite closely together. So, my third tip is to choose wisely and consider how much you can justify paying. I'm going to merge the two of those together because they can be interlinked. In my experience, most people are really nice. So, having a personality match is important, but it isn't the only thing you need to be looking for. So, some things to consider are the way they work and whether that's compatible with how you like to work. You also might want to consider how autonomously they like to work and whether that's compatible with what you have in mind, or if you're willing to adapt your ideas. Also, whether you need them to have specialist skills or knowledge. This one is really important because it will dictate what you can justify spending. Now, in my experience, and for the kind of work that I delegate, I don't feel there's additional value in my VA knowing much about the education space. If they need to have some context, then I'm confident that I can just tell them. So I take that off the table of my must haves. Also, I'm pretty adept in setting up systems and technology. I have my social media strategy in place. So, again, specialist knowledge in those areas aren't something I prioritize. However, I do have a lot of moving parts and admin. So, some of those things have deadlines. I need my VA to be organized and to be a great communicator. They are my must haves. So, this is what influences who I choose, as well as what I'm willing to pay. When I was looking for my last VA, I spoke to quite a few and they were brilliant at what they did, but they charged in the region of around £35 to £45 per hour. Now, that price would have absolutely been worth it if I needed their specialist skills, but I couldn't justify spending it for the admin tasks I need to delegate, the type of things I needed to delegate. I'll tell you what to help me navigate this. It's the book called The E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber. It's a must read for any business owner. And one of the things he talks about is the value in having systems in place. And one of the reasons is so that you can employ the least qualified person who can do the job. So he gives him the example of McDonald's, and he says that their staff don't need to know how to make a burger. They need to know how to press the button for the machine that makes the burger. And when you map this to your situation, you can decide whether you need someone who has more or less specialist skill or knowledge, and that will influence who you choose to work with and how much you can justify investing. And on that note, here is my quick fourth tip. As you identify your must haves, also identify your deal breakers. Before I'd started working with my current VA, I had a brief stint with another. She was brilliantly capable and she was quite cheap. She was a lovely person and very, very efficient. It was a win win. However, I hadn't thought about my deal breakers. I only thought about what I wanted. So I also went through the stress of her being a poor communicator, being unreliable. Sometimes she would tell me she couldn't work on the day she was supposed to. And as horrible as this experience was, it was a valuable way for me to set the right tone when I had meetings with other VAs. I knew what to ask for and I knew what to look out for. Now, my next couple of tips are very quick ones. I talked about systems earlier, but I want to come at it from a slightly different angle: onboarding. Over the years, I have created a structured onboarding system and a way of working together that not only makes it easy to get started fast, but also for me to make changes fast too. You see, none of us know what's around the corner. And let's say your VA has to stop working with you, or something changes on your side, or let's say you aren't happy with your existing VA. You don't want to feel like you're trapped. Because when someone is deep in your business, it can feel like a really huge task to getting someone new settled in. So I have future-proofed my systems, and if you're in my Tutors Mastermind, you can see my free video demo of how I've done it. Just head over to the demos in the guide section of our Facebook group. I've popped the link in the show notes. My next quick tip is to remember to have visibility, at the very least, of the tasks that you delegate. I use ClickUp to manage working together, and at one glance, I can see what my VA has to do, what she's working on, and what she has finished, as well as other statuses depending on the type of task. On top of this, we stay in contact on WhatsApp and we have a monthly catch up meeting. So even though you're delegating tasks to save time, it is still your business. And if anything goes wrong or if mistakes are made, you are typically the one who has to untangle it. So prevention is better than cure. And with that in mind, it's important to stay on top of knowing what's happening and to having great communication. That way, you can catch things like mistakes before they have an impact. It's also been a really useful way for me to identify pinch points in tasks that highlight a need for it to be streamlined. I remember there was a task that was taking my VA 4 hours, and I was thinking it doesn't take me that long. I need to work out where I've gone wrong in my instructions. I need to work out how to streamline it. And by doing that, I got it down to 2 hours. So, having visibility and strong communication, all of that's really important. And of course, you're likely to be working with your VA for a long time. So, having a strong relationship is important. Making sure that you're supporting them and staying in contact goes a really long way towards that. And finally, think about how you best work and the demands that you have right now. Here's an example. You might need uninterrupted work, and so you might decide to work with an agency, one where there are many VAs. And let's say if your one is on holiday, then another can take over. Now, this is great, but when I was thinking about it, I wanted a more personal connection with my VA. And because I was going through some medical things, I needed actually more flexibility. And generally speaking, most agencies don't have the same level of flexibility that an independent VA has. Whereas an independent VA might be off sick or they might go on holiday, and so you do risk there being interruptions or disruptions. I've always worked with independent VAs. I would work with an agency too, but it's just the choice that I've made. And I have been lucky in that even if they're going on holiday, they've actually been really great at organising their work around it, so it hasn't been disruptive. There have only been a couple of occasions where it hasn't been possible, and their absence has meant I've had to take the reins a little bit. But just because that's been my experience doesn't mean that it will be yours. So think really carefully about what matters more to you. Don't be afraid to learn by trying because you're not going to be tied in. You can change your mind around who you work with. But the more you have some kind of idea of what you need, the more likely you'll be to hire the right person. So I hope these ideas from my experience has been helpful, especially if you're at those beginning stages of exploring hiring a VA. It can be really difficult to let go of control, but I promise you it'll be liberating when you do, and it will release so much time. It's a really worthwhile investment. But making sure that you are thinking about what you're investing in and who you're investing in is important, because we can be mistaken for thinking that just because we're in the education space, our VA needs to understand that space. As I've discovered, it really hasn't been important. It's not an important factor. I would love to hear what your experiences are. So please do connect with me on social media if we're not already. You can find me on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. So thanks as always for spending your time with me, and you'll hear from me on Wednesday. Would you like to take this discussion further? Perhaps you have some questions or you'd like more ideas on tailoring your business. If so, book a free discovery call through the link in the show notes.